Buckle up, Canada. We're approaching the finish line in the 43rd federal election. Hello and welcome to the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand. Here at the Cafe, we aim to bring you guests and issues for discussion and debate. The Unpublished Cafe is part of the Unpublished Media suite of websites created to inform and educate Canadians on current affairs and political issues. Each podcast delves into a different issue in a nonpartisan way, so listeners and viewers can share their informed opinions with Canadians and their local MPs through Unpublished.Ottawa.com and Unpublished.vote. The upcoming federal election is a focus for us and to bring you a balanced view of the parties and their policies. Now, since September 11th, we've been under a constant barrage of insults, insinuation, and, well, outright lies. But hey, as Kim Campbell said on the trail, an election campaign is no time to talk about serious issues. Of course, those words haunted her and the Conservatives as they were banished to the backbenches when Jean Chretien and the Liberals took their first of 3 straight majorities. Personally, my fear going into this election was the use of deception and deep fake to sway voters. Technologies advance so fast and add to the mix of social media, and you may not be able to discern right from wrong, up from down. But as we sit on the eve of polling day, the road to the House is far from clear. Here on the Cafe, we've brought you all the political parties and their views on the issues to give you a chance to make an informed decision. And coming up on the Cafe, we'll chat with Caroline Andrew, Director of the Centre on Governance at the University of Ottawa, as well as an expert on Canadian politics. But first, I am pleased to be joined by Tom Koroski, Managing Editor of Blacklocks Reporter. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Oh, my pleasure, Ed.
Now, you've been in covering elections and politics for a long time. Is this the nastiest election you've ever seen here in Canada?
I really don't think it is. I think there's actually been a lot worse. I understand that some participants felt it was unpleasant, and I guess it is if someone's taking shots at you. But, the fact is there are people fighting for their professional lives. And, there are some face washers in hockey, too, but it's still a great game. And I didn't think this was particularly extraordinarily bad or unpleasant.
Oh, really? Really? It just seemed everything I've been reading is just another insult, another insinuation, or is that's just, it's a big boys game, and if you don't like it, go home.
Well, we had an election where someone made fun of the partial facial paralysis of a Liberal leader. There was a Canadian Alliance leader who was once described as an anti-Semite because he went to a garage where Jim Keegstra worked to get his car serviced. I mean, strong people have strong opinions. They're fighting for their lives, and it's a rough sport, but that's it. I mean, if you don't want to participate in that, stay home and knit socks. I don't know why this was considered let's be frank, Ed. Mm-hmm. It was Liberal campaign organizers who described this as a particularly nasty campaign. And I think there's a reason for that. There was no particular reason for the campaign. If there was an overarching issue for 4 more years for the incumbent government, it wasn't obvious until you read their platform. Forget the hodgepodge of amendments to the Income Tax Act. You read their platform, you know what strikes you? There's 24 pictures of Justin Trudeau. 24. They wanted to make this a referendum on Trudeau, and they did. And then it went horribly awry, as everyone recalls.
Yes.
Then they say, well, what an unpleasant campaign.
Now, when you look at this campaign, and this is just broken in the last day or so, former Liberal insider Warren Kinsella has been named as being hired by the Scheer Conservatives to take down People's Party leader Maxime Bernier. Cons won't say whether they did it, but can this blow up in their face?
I think that Max was treated badly by all party leaders. I don't know why he was disqualified from the debates. I say in all sincerity, I don't really understand why he is painted, even in media depictions, the way he is. The People's Party position is to cut immigration to $250,000 a year, $250,000 a year. Well, that's what it was in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. I don't think that's anti-immigration. That was conventional wisdom for a long time. So parties play rough. The Conservatives, of course, had a vested interest in keeping Bernier out of the debates. He also has a point when he says no one objected, including parties that have been there, right? There's the Green Party knows all about getting the stick in a competitive atmosphere, and no one really said anything when Bernier was disqualified from the debates. I don't really understand the position.
Now, the Liberals and Conservatives have basically been neck and neck since the writ dropped, and we have a number of wildcards at play this time around. Since the English language debate, the NDP has been on the rise. The Greens are, well, the strongest they've ever been this late in a campaign, and you've got two high-profile independents, and obviously Jody Wilson-Ray Bolton and Jane Philpott, along with the aforementioned Bernier. Are we heading toward a dysfunctional parliament here?
I think it'll be very highly functional, but there won't be a majority. This is the year for the real McCoy. I've thought this for some time, even before the election campaign. This is not a year for posers or fakers, and this is not a year for feeling good. And that's not exclusive to Canada. That's happened to other countries. People are looking for the real McCoy. So if you care about an issue, if you care about corporate welfare, if you care about pipelines or climate change, or taxing equity. These are very substantial platform positions that were put forth by various parties. This is your year. This is the year for the real McCoy. So that means there's going to be a split on voting. Anyone can see that. And no one knows how the splits will go. But all it is frankly, a candid discussion of divisions of opinion by serious people on serious issues that they really care about. It's great.
Tom Koroski joining us on the Unpublished Cafe as we get set for federal election 43 and the Canadians going to the polls tomorrow. And, you know, we talked a bit about the media and not feeling that, or a lot of them feeling that this was a fairly nasty campaign. I think you've got some comments on the proposal for, a media bailout or whatever. Coming on the heels of this conservative endorsement from National Post and all Post media newspapers, this whole media bailout thing, you could end up giving money to the people who are sticking to one side of the story anyway. Terrible
idea. It's just a terrible, terrible idea. It's a waste of $500 million. If you just burned $500 million in the driveway, you'd get more, presumably, heat value out of it than you would giving it to incompetent, money-losing press managers. The bailout was a terrible, terrible idea. They shoehorned it into an omnibus bill. They jackhammered it through Parliament. There was cursory explanation for it. To this day, no one knows exactly how it's going to work. It's a complete waste of money, let alone what they bought for $500 million. They bought coverage. I hope the first act of any new government is just to repeal that bailout. It is an outrage. The taxpayers have to pay for that.
When I look at this campaign, and I've been thinking this one for a while, I'm wondering if the electorate doesn't deserve a little bit of the blame here when we talk about, misinformation or, we've seen it on Facebook and websites and such where they're, slanted one way or the other. But I find the electorate, they only look for the message they want. And whether it's true or not, that's the way they stay.
Although, Ed, a couple of things I'd say.
Sure.
Number one, it's not their job. Right. I mean, the kids are screaming, the screen door's banging, that the mortgage payment is due. People lead busy lives. The second thing I would say is for anybody who wanted substantive discussion about an issue that will affect their life, you can find it if you want it. And I actually don't hear people at the hockey rink or the grocery store saying, you know what, if there just wasn't enough discussion about issues that was relevant to me, because it's easy to find and it's never been easier. If you care about universal drug coverage, they actually discussed that this campaign. Mm-hmm. If you care about pipelines or climate change, there was page after page of policy proposals and agonizing, detailed debate about that issue. My personal favorite, NDP proposed to tax federal income the same way that municipalities tax property, based on what you own, not on what you earn. That's a very substantial policy change that affects a lot of people. If you want to talk about that, you can talk about that. If you want to sit in your lazy boy, and I refer to voters, media, or party leaders, and say, well, this is just too rough for me, you can get out of this what you want to get out of it, Ed.
Tom Koroski joining us in the Unpublished Cafe. He is the managing editor of Blacklocks Reporter as we get set for election 43 coming up tomorrow. Canadians will be heading to the polls tomorrow. And when you look at the landscape of Canada right now and the electoral landscape, what's your sort of gut feeling on what we're going to be looking at tomorrow night?
I think in terms of broad sweeps, impossible to say where these splits will go. This is the year for the real McCoys. I think third parties are going to have a good night. I'm going to be candid, Ed. I have to tell you, I also think the Prime Minister is permanently diminished by this campaign. I don't see him fulfilling or running another entire term. I think it's a matter of, frankly, months or weeks. I think he's finished. I've never seen a political figure gets smaller and more diminished than Trudeau did in this campaign. It started with blackface. There wasn't such a great August when he's cited by an ethics report. Mm-hmm. They wanted to make this a referendum on Trudeau. They later changed their mind, but it was too late. The die was cast. And I think for a large number of electors, he is a weak, silly man with a costume fetish. In advanced polling in Calgary, Ed, 194,000 people cast ballots, the most of any city. They are steaming mad. And it's inconceivable that the diminished figure of Trudeau comes out of this with any sort of enhanced reputation.
Wow. So you figure he's gone after a few months?
I really do.
Win or lose.
Whether there's a Liberal minority or not, I think the guy's done.
Mm-hmm. And your prediction for tomorrow night, do you think it will be a Liberal minority or a Conservative majority, or what do you think will be the results?
I think it's impossible to say. It really is. You're talking down to mathematics on splits and 338 contests. It's very difficult to say. I see some pollsters predicting with confidence Liberal majority. Nobody thinks that. I mean, they lose 15 seats, the majority is gone. Mm-hmm. I'm not even talking about Ontario and Quebec. So there's going to be a minority. I think Greens get status. I know that's not reflected in the polls. I think the Green Party gets 12 seats. I think this is their year. And I think there's going to be a bunch of crazy splits. And there's going to be a loss of a lot of Liberal seats in British Columbia, Greater Vancouver. They have a dozen seats out there. Forget about hanging on to at least 6 of those. They're going to lose 4 Liberal seats in Alberta. That's a given. We can go down the map, Ed. Mm-hmm. Liberals have 32 seats in Atlantic Canada. They're not sticking on to those. I mean, Green Party went to Fredericton 3 times. Elizabeth May went to Fredericton 3 times in the campaign because there are seats at play out there. So the Liberals will lose seats. There's no doubt about it, and I don't see where they're making them up.
Tom, I want to thank you for joining us.
Always good to talk to you, Ed.
And you as well. I want to thank Tom Koroski for joining us. He is the managing editor of Blacklocks Reporter. Now, off the top, I mentioned this election campaign has pretty well been neck and neck since the writ dropped. Endorsements are what parties clamor for to influence the electorate. The Conservatives got a big one yesterday from Post Media. To talk about that and the rest of the campaign, I'm pleased to be joined by Caroline Andrew, Director of the Centre on Governance at the University of Ottawa. And Caroline, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much. How big is that endorsement for the Conservatives from Post Media?
Well, I think it's certainly an endorsement, but people know that Post Media will be endorsing the Conservatives. So in a way, it certainly reinforces those who are going to vote Conservative, but I don't think it really changes the outcome of the election because people know how the various media sources line up, and so they either will agree with them and feel reinforced, or they think that they're always been wrong and they just won't pay any attention. So I think that it's clearly going to be a cliffhanger. We're going to be clearly waiting for the British Columbians to decide. But I think that the positions, I don't think that the positions taken by one particular media source really do anything but reinforce those who have never liked them, and of course reinforce those who have always believed they were right.
Does it matter that those newspapers are really American owned?
Now that's well, given how important, I suppose that reinforces the negative opinion of those who think that we're too dominated by media sources from the USA. On the other hand, there's such an interesting debate going on in the U.S. about the proper form of government these days that maybe it makes people, I think it takes away probably from people's complete interest in the Canadian election. But I think, as I say, I think it just reinforces the positions that people already take.
I find it interesting that conservative supporters, of course, are all sharing on Facebook and everywhere else this endorsement from Post Media. But earlier this week, they were all up in arms when Barack Obama came out and endorsed Justin Trudeau. There seems to be a bit of a
yes.
It doesn't seem to add up.
No, I think people basically. And everyone figured out that over Thanksgiving, people would be talking and firming up their positions. And I think it just reflects that most people know how they're going to vote. And I think it will just go to their but it's certainly true. People who liked Obama thought that it was great that he came out and was in favor of his friend Justin, but I think that it won't really change people's minds. I don't think. I think that they're going to vote the way they sort of chatted about around Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm. Caroline Andrew joining us on the Unpublished Cafe. She's director of the Center on Governance at the University of Ottawa and frequent commentator on Canadian politics. And to me, Caroline, it seemed the NDP was just withering away in third place, and then came this English debate. And that seemed to set them on fire, and it seemed to set the Bloc Québécois on fire as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because we always think that debates are not all that important, but look at this one. Yes, as you say, it really changed. It swept up I think it's partly depending on all the work that the young woman from the North came and talked about climate change. People are really getting ready for that. And I think that especially I think in British Columbia, because they have really seen climate change and the impact on all kinds of things on the getting more ice and getting more rain, and they've always had rain, but getting more. And I think so that's one of the reasons that I think it will be fought out in British Columbia, because a lot of the issues have really got fired up there. And I think you're right that the NDP, who seem to be just nowhere in the election, is now a really contender, and it will go to the wire with people worrying about these really important issues like climate change, which we've never necessarily in Canada taken it all that seriously, though we ought to, because we're going to be the worst country hit by climate change when the whole glaciers are melting up north. So I think that it's going to be a close race, and it will be in the West, because that's where there's a long history of the West inventing new political parties, from social credit to all kinds of things. And so I think it
the
will
Alliance,
be fought
the Reform Party.
Yes, all kinds of good and bad ideas come from the West, and I think it'll really show up there. So it will be Alberta and the Conservatives, and British Columbia with the NDP and probably more the Liberals. So I think it'll be a close race with lots of excitement. But I think that we'll be up for a long night with the elections.
So you seem to see the BC and Alberta. We're going to be looking for them for obviously the results, and it seems when we look back in the past here, it's usually Quebec. Who's going to win Quebec is going to win the election.
Yeah, but I think this time it's I think Quebec will go pretty well for the Liberals, with maybe a few. I don't think the Bloc hasn't done as well. There may be a couple of seats for the Bloc, but I think it's going to go massively for the Liberals, with maybe one. They seem to be saying maybe one or two NDP, but not very many. I think it'll go, and the same thing. I think Ontario will. Ontario will split, I think, between the Toronto and the outskirts.
The 416 and the 905.
Yeah, and that's the classic separation, and I think that'll continue. So we'll roll through the prairies, and we'll get to what's going to be the really battleground, Alberta and British Columbia.
Tell me something. This has been from what I've seen, a very nasty campaign. But would you say this has been the nastiest Canadian election campaign?
Probably not the nastiest. There's been some pretty nasty ones, but I think it has been unpleasant. It hasn't been a nice. You haven't felt there was a real. A good discussion about things. It just seemed rather little. The debates were insignificant. You couldn't understand who was talking to who and whatever. I don't think it was very. So I don't think the debates helped anything, and I think there has been some nastiness certainly between the Liberals and the Conservatives, saying some pretty nasty things about one another. So, I think it hasn't been a great campaign in terms of teaching Canadians much about how they should vote or what are the real issues. And we know there are some real issues. Reconciliation with the Indigenous population, and that didn't get much debate during the election. No, and much less than it should have, and stuff about sort of the future of work. Are our children going to be able to afford an education? There were a lot of things that didn't get taken up in the election, which is too bad. But in part, the organization of the debates was so. I was going to say incoherent, but it was so you got people matching who didn't have anything they disagreed with or nothing they agreed with. And so I think that there are probably a lot of people who, probably everyone's made up their mind for who they're going to vote for, but they're not sure whether it's going to, I think they're not sure what's going to be the consequence for the real issues for Canada.
All right, Caroline, last question. Prediction on tomorrow. What do you see as the results of the 43rd federal election?
I think it'll be probably, it's hard to say. I think it may be a minority election, and so we'll be wondering late at night who's going to support who, and there's a number of possibilities in that way. So I think we're going to see a long night, and I'm not sure any conclusive directions for the next 4 or 5 years. But I hope there may be a better outcome than I'm thinking there will be, but I'm not sure.
All right. Caroline, I want to thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
I want to thank Caroline Andrew, Director of the Center on Governance at the University of Ottawa, for joining us. Now it's your turn to weigh in on the campaign and where you feel the country is going. Which party do you support in this election? The Conservatives, Liberals, NDP, Green, or People's Party of Canada? You can log on and vote at Unpublished.Vote and have your say. I want to thank Tom Koroski, Managing Editor of Blacklocks Reporter, for joining us, along with Caroline Andrew at the University of Ottawa. And I want to thank you for listening to the Unpublished Cafe. I'm Ed Hand.